Gracious Father, as we open your word this morning, we ask that you grant to speaker and hearer alike the presence of your Spirit, that hearing we may understand, and understanding obey to the glory of your name. Amen. Would you be seated, please? It was hard enough to read when I was simply reading it at home. Much harder to hear it here in public. There are, according to the one-time chief rabbi in the UK, Jonathan Sacks, three main reasons why people no longer believe in any faith, let alone the Christian faith. He lists them in this way. First is the belief that science has shown that God either does not exist or probably doesn't exist. The second is the problem of suffering. And the third is what he calls when religion goes wrong and is used for violence and for terror. Each of these would require a sermon in themselves, and so I'm going to focus in the light of the reading from the Gospel on number 2, the problem of innocent suffering. The Bible addresses this issue head on. The realism of the Bible never fades. It is always there. Rather than see it as an embarrassment, the Bible instead devotes 2 whole books to it and shows God that God is deeply concerned for humanity and does all he can to answer the questions that we have. And we're going to have a quick look at both those books. In 1,500 words, I'm going to cover books stuff. But there's a warning here. Before we proceed, we must say and hear and note and take under advisement. We may not like the answers that the Bible gives. The 2 books that address this head on are the book of Job and the book of Lamentations. Job's the story of a godly man, as you know, who suffers calamity after calamity in his life. Amidst his pain, he has some friends come to comfort him and counsel. In summary, their main argument is that there must be something wrong with Job for him to have suffered in the way that he has. He's done something wrong. He's committed some sin or offended God in some way, and the result is the judgment that he suffers. Job, in reply, insists that he has done nothing to deserve the terrible calamities that come upon him. At the end of the book, and the vast majority of the book is spent with the people who become known as Job's comforters. At the end of the book, God himself comes on the scene and remonstrates not only with Job's comforters for the false ideas that they give, but also with Job himself. God turns to Job in the end, and in 2 whole chapters just fires out a series of questions. Could you see this? Would you understand that? Could you do this? Do you know what's happened here? It just goes on and on and on. And the obvious answer to every question that God answers is no. Basically, they point Job to the fact that he cannot understand some of the more obvious things. So how does he think that he'll be able to understand the mystery of evil in the world or in his own life? If we are looking for an intellectually satisfying answer to the problem of pain, we won't find it here. The answer lies elsewhere, as you'll see. And God is in the same position with Job as we are so often with our children. One day our son had a tummy bug. He could keep no food down, and it was not pleasant for him. He came to us and he said, "I asked Jesus not to make me sick." Now we knew that probably the best way to help him was to get rid of what was in his tummy. But try saying that to a 3 or 4 year old, or he might have been 5 or 6, I can't remember the time. He just could not understand. He just knows, I didn't want that, and I don't like this, and it's very uncomfortable, and I asked Jesus, and he said no. Now that is a minuscule and in some ways quite unhelpful example of what I'm saying, but so often, folks, we must hear that in relationship to God, even with all our wisdom and knowledge, still we are children in his presence. I've often thought as I've grappled with some theological problem and come up with a great answer that you can almost hear the Trinity saying, did you get him? He thinks he's understood it. And we don't. If Nathan had got an answer to his prayer, his body would have remained with the toxicity which could have done more damage. But he couldn't understand that. So while all of this may be intellectually unsatisfying, it was not so to Job. Listen to his response. I'm going to have to find it quickly. And then Job replied to God, I know that you can do all things, and that no plan of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is it that obscures my counsel without knowledge? Surely, I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. You said, listen now, and I will speak. I will question, and you shall answer me. My ears had heard of you, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. The vision of God that was given to Job just took the pain, and it was immense pain that he suffered, as you know the story, and just shrunk it down to the size that it was appropriate. The vision of God just took it over. There will come a day, folks, when either we will understand or we will see evil and sin and horror in its proper proportion to the wonder of the God whom we serve. But please, do not take this answer to someone who is in the midst of deep pain or grief. Take rather a compassionate heart. Take your tears, and above all, take your silence and your prayers. I can understand a friend of mine. He's a godly man and spent his whole life dealing with the results of human pain and evil. He's a colleague in the church army. And he said when he came to the end of the book of Job, he was quite dissatisfied. There was a question to be answered, and it had not been answered. I have a great deal of sympathy with him, and yet I beg to differ. We can only begin to address the pain of the world around us if first we will acknowledge that we do not know, and we must take our ignorance very seriously. It goes very deep. It's a quote from C.S. Lewis in his, and now the title of the book's gone out of my head, of Fern Seed and Elephants is the title of the sermon. We do not know, he said, and we must take our ignorance seriously. hear Job again. I'd heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Look at the wonder. Stand in awe between the majesty and greatness of all that God is. And the only response will be, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Well, so much for Job in just a few words. The second book's even harder to read. The book of Lamentations is, as its title says, a lament over the destruction of Jerusalem and the deportation of the people of God to a foreign land. Jeremiah had the difficult task of explaining to his fellow Jews what had happened because they had persisted in disobedience. And that disobedience, folks, had carried on for 4 centuries. God had sent prophet after prophet after prophet to warn them, to say, if you do this, that's where it will end up. But if you will repent and turn away, it won't happen. They were warned again and again and again. Please change your ways. You're living in a manner that's against the covenant I have set with you. You are part of my great rescue plan for the world, and you are distorting everything I have taught, you have been taught. For the sake of my world and for my sake, change your ways. Otherwise, I must come in judgment against you, remove you from the land, destroy your temple through which you have dishonored my name, so that for the sake of the world you may be made whole again. Can you imagine a message like that? That's tough. The message of impending doom is not an easy one to bring, neither is it an easy one to hear. But that's the message that God gives through Jeremiah, his prophet. It's your fault. I did warn you again and again and again, and you would not listen. And now I must turn to Jesus and the story from the Gospels that we read today. For we come there to a vital piece of the problem we've been grappling with. Mark has a way of giving short versions of things. One of his favourite words is immediately. Everything happens immediately in St. Mark. The story of the beheading of John the Baptist is told in each of the 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark and Luke. In Luke it's just a comment that's made, but it's there. But in Matthew's version, Matthew adds this. Now when Jesus heard this, that John had been executed and later buried by his disciples, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. Why? Each of the commentaries I've read say things like it was a strategic withdrawal. It was safer for him, Jesus, to go away at this stage. I don't doubt that. But I wonder if there was something else. It's always a dangerous thing, folks, for us to say that we know what motivates a person. We don't, unless they tell us. And the text is silent on this. It doesn't tell us why Jesus did what he did. It just says that he went away. But he did go. And if it was a strategic withdrawal, even so, Jesus must have gone with a very heavy heart. Was he going to spend time with his Father, knowing the answers to the questions that we don't know, and yet still feeling the pain of what had happened to his colleague, his cousin, and his friend? Jesus, folks, understands pain. A life has been taken at the whim of a powerful man who had had too much wine and spoke rashly. Now a good and godly man was dead. And with this, folks, we come to the heart of the problem of innocent suffering. It is God's answer, and is no more palatable to us than any of the other responses that we have given. God's answer is that he came into the midst of that pain and the evil that had produced it and gave his own life, and this is the hard bit, for the pain givers, for the cowards, the foolish, the rash, and the disobedience. He, the creator of all, who had given to human beings the freedom to obey or rebel and turn away, took responsibility for his own actions in creating free people, and did the only thing that he could do to come and rescue us. He allowed evil to use its full armory of weapons against him and broke every one of them. He took on death itself and broke its power so that we who had caused it all could be free to follow him and become the answer to the problem of pain rather than part of the problem. For that's the ultimate answer to the problem of pain and suffering. We can argue the rights and wrongs of it. We can do our best to understand it. But ultimately, we have to follow a crucified master into the world that he loves and gave his life for and give our lives for. Christianity, folks, is not a comfortable faith to follow. We must go into the world and live for Jesus Christ. We must demonstrate the truths that he gave us and that we speak in his name. We must challenge injustice, right wrongs, learn to forgive, and have the courage of, like John the Baptist, to speak for those who have no voice. We must be people who understand rather than judge. We must love even though we disagree. And we must do it all with the grace and tenacity of the Master we are called to follow. The answer to the problem of human suffering is not found in our intellect. Stretch it to the full though we must continue to think and probe and answer. The answer to the problem of pain is in the hands of all who follow the crucified Master. The answer is you. The answer is me. The answer